Welcome to the Dr. Detective A PhD True Crime Podcast, the show where we bring you critical assessment based on experience. I'm excited again today. We have a great episode, and I'm going to introduce the wonderful Phil Ramos. Thank you for being here again, Detective Ramos, as always.
My pleasure, man.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so we're going to talk about this wild story with Diddy. Again, you all know Detective Ramos, 3 times Officer of the Year. Um, Wonderful, amazing detective, and the stories of your cases with the cartel and everything else. And again, so we're going to talk about Diddy, right? I know it's a trending topic, but interesting thing. I'm going to pose a question. So this is about S workers. We can't say the term, right? Or trafficking, and some particular specific aspects of that. So again, it's 80 degrees. I'm sorry, 80 degrees here. You said 108 there in Vegas, huh?
Yeah, man, it's miserable. It's
Wow.
miserable. I go for a walk every night, and I had to take 2 bottles of water last night.
Wow.
It was still over 100 at like 7:30, 8 o'clock at night.
Wow. So yeah, definitely a lot of water, air conditioning, and do you have any pets, by the way? I
Yeah,
never asked that.
yeah. We have 2 little Maltese dogs,
Okay.
and they're inside dogs anyway.
Gotcha. Do they like how do they feel about going outside in this heat? Do they hurry out and do their business and
Yeah,
come back?
they go out and do their business not very far from their little doggy door, and then zoom right back in.
Oh, you got the doggy door. Yeah. Have you ever had any drastic things happen, like them bringing unwanted things in, or
No, man, they're not. They're like the hippies of the dog world. They don't bring any strangers in. And if,
okay,
I have a pool guy comes by once a week, same
okay,
guy, same time every week, and they still go crazy,
okay.
barking at him. And as soon as he turns and looks at them, they come running in the house.
Wow. Yeah. So it's like a respect thing. They have to acknowledge them, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
we had a
yeah,
Yorkie poodle, and we lost him a couple years ago. We may get another one, but yeah, he was like that with certain people, right? If they didn't acknowledge him,
yeah,
he would go crazy. But yeah, that's their
yeah,
job.
yeah,
Yep. So yeah, thanks again for coming on. So
yeah.
we'll
My
talk
pleasure,
about
man.
thank you. Diddy and these S workers. Probably going to make the mistake and say the word, but hopefully YouTube forgives us for that in the process. But this is brought to you by Dr. Detective in collaboration with the True Crime Talk channel with STS. Again, let's get right into it. So this will be more kind of informal discussion we're going to have. So we know Sean Diddy Combs is charged with racketeering or RICO and S trafficking and transportation for prostitution, right? So we know the story. We've heard the active case that's ongoing, and but I want to pose another question here. So what always came to mind for me is why this was a civil suit and not criminal. What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I don't know why. And then, you know, I think they're overreaching trying to get a RICO conviction on him because that's, I mean, he's the only one that's subject to uh, the whole case.
Right, right. He's the only one
RICO,
charged.
yeah, RICO statutes were for organizations. I mean, it's in the name,
Right, right.
racketeering, influence,
Exactly,
corrupt organization. So,
exactly.
yeah, I don't get that, but it doesn't sound like anybody else was involved. He's the one that was uh, directing all these freaky parties that they were having at the hotels and stuff. And
Right,
the people that he was hiring and coming in to engage in various activities with his girlfriend and other people were
right,
that was their job. That's what they did. So
right.
I don't. From what I understand and reading the articles, they weren't forced into doing anything. So that
Okay,
that one the trafficking charge, um, frankly, I'm having trouble seeing it because it doesn't
okay.
sound like he was forcing anybody to do that.
Right. Yeah.
I
Excellent point. Yeah.
yeah.
And we look at it different because we're have a law enforcement background, and I'm sure you've been involved in many RICO cases as well. So I have
Hmm.
a couple initially that were transferred federally, and they talked about pursuing that. One kind of fell apart, but I don't know. We had state charges, but yeah, we look at things a little different. So I really appreciate you coming on. What I found with this, and I wanted to share with everyone, maybe this will help answer our questions. Why civil, not criminal? So I wanted to talk about the difference with them. So I got to make this larger because I don't have my glasses. But basically, criminal charges are brought by the government, and the goal is to punish the offender with jail time or probation. The prosecutors pretty much control the case, not the survivor. Whereas with the civil suits, the survivors can kind of control the case and they file the civil suit themselves. So the goal is accountability, truth,
Mhm.
and financial damages for pain, suffering, and loss. So we'll talk about this. Because yeah, as you mentioned, the transportation charge, I'm wondering, do they actually have that? The other episode I recorded recently talked about RICO, and as you said, it's an organization or enterprise essentially. So if you're
Yeah.
my employees, are you my enterprise? And I guess it's very distinct between employee versus someone outside of that um, organization, or I guess the um, collective, I guess, inner workings.
Yeah. And the whole thing about this is, say you hire somebody to engage in the world's oldest profession,
Right,
Craigslist or these other websites where you can obtain people for these particular services, and you're paying them,
right,
which is why they're doing it in the first place. Well, 99% of the time, for
right,
financial gain. Um, Especially the individuals who work independently. They don't work for
right,
any uh, a purveyor of flesh or anything like that. So
right, right.
that's their business. That's what they choose to do. So that's where my confusion's coming in on the trafficking, and
Okay,
hopefully they'll clear it up. If you and I are having this kind of a discussion and confusion with our backgrounds,
right.
I can imagine what's going on in the jury's heads. They're probably thinking, "Wait a minute, man, why are we here?" So
Exactly, exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I think the same thing because I'm looking at the statues and we are looking at it from, of course, law enforcement, but the fact that um there's relationships, I mean, the obvious thing, the domestic violence, right? We'll talk about that in a slide coming
right,
up. But the obvious domestic violence that took place where this started with Cassie and so I mean I do see, they're approaching it from the civil side and why survivors will choose civil because they're looking at it like they're in control. They control the legal strategy and timeline. It lowers the burden of proof. So there's really the preponderance of evidence versus with criminal beyond a reasonable doubt.
yeah,
So yeah, and
yeah,
I guess with this power and influence, that can factor in. But yeah, I don't know if they've kind of thrown law enforcement under the bus. But there's
yeah.
there's obviously, yeah,
It's and they're doing so much name dropping. I mean, you got a
right,
lot of Hollywood A-list celebrities that their names are being mentioned as having come to these parties, and having a specific name, a freak off. That's it's pretty general
right,
as far as hey man, come on over to the Hilton. We're having a freak off. Well, that could be anything,
right,
um, unless
and
you've
plus,
been before, and that's what they call these encounters.
right, and yeah, and my understanding is he has these like white parties or have had these like parties, and I guess after a certain time it transfers to these alleged freak offs. By the way, which are now called hotel nights. So, uh,
Okay.
right. So, like, I mean, you haven't already put that word out there. The term is viral or whatever you want to call it. It's, everyone
Yeah,
knows what they're called,
yeah,
but now they're
yeah,
hotel nights, I guess. So, respectfully, but yeah. So, I mean, we know there's a large amount of capital at stake because survivors are entitled to, or survivors, victims are entitled to 3 times monetary compensation if they can prove it. But obviously, we've seen up to this point domestic violence, threats of bribery, threats of
mhm,
cars
mhm,
being bombed and arson. So it looks like, I mean,
Yeah,
they're trying to, as I mentioned, trying to paint that portrait and picture of what RICO is, but
yeah, and they're bringing in, I think everybody in the world has seen that video of him chasing down Cassie by the elevator bank, and he knocks
right.
her down, and then he's kicking her. Well, that's straight out domestic violence. That's
Absolutely.
a battery, a domestic violence battery, a felony.
Right.
So that's definitely a criminal charge, but he's
Yes.
not being charged criminally.
Eh, yes. Yeah,
It's
that, and I see.
confusing because it's just like it doesn't make sense. What they've presented so far, and I believe the prosecution has already, taken their swing at the ball, and now it's the
Right.
defense, and they're bringing in information that they think is going to create a reasonable doubt, and
Right.
it, just in my view, I think the reasonable doubt is there because everybody, it seems, was a willing participant. Even
Okay.
the girls who are going in anonymously or with pseudonyms and stuff like that,
Right.
their defense is bringing up, well, look at these emails that you sent and these text messages that you sent, that you're having a great time and you love him and you're taking care
Right.
of him. I read one article, I think it was today or yesterday, where one of the girlfriends was talking about how she would rub his feet and try to take care of him and say, "Well, he was my baby. I was trying to take care of him." Which, on the surface, that's
Right.
what you do for your person. Somebody wants a massage, you give them a massage. Somebody wants, their head rubbed, you rub their head. But
Right.
where does the criminal aspect, or where are the circumstances and situations that the jury has to consider in order to
Right.
find for the prosecution? It's
Exactly. Yeah, like you mentioned, reasonable doubt versus preponderance of evidence for civil. Yeah, and I mean that also, again, so looking at this, yeah, they're saying, you know, S trafficking is a form of human trafficking, federal and state levels. But yeah, back to that domestic violence you mentioned, that incident with the hotel. I'm just wondering, in what world would we be able to keep our jobs if we're made aware?
yeah,
And I know there was some kind of delay, and there was the bribery attempt to hold the evidence, and the hotel was liable, or they've settled out of court as far as with
right,
Cassie.
right,
But in
right.
what world are we not making an arrest, whether she
Yeah,
wanted to or not at the time?
yeah. Well, and that's
That's
the whole point of domestic violence statutes is,
right,
over the years, when it all started coming to light, the victim would call the cops and say, "Hey, my boyfriend just beat me up, and this is what happened, and I got a black eye, and all
right,
this." Um, and then they went ahead and either arrested them or didn't arrest them. But now the
right,
victims don't have a say in that. Now,
right,
because they were losing cases because the victims were reluctant to testify, that's when the modern domestic violence cases came to light. So now, I mean, we've all been on cases where you tried to arrest the boyfriend, and the girlfriend jumps on your back saying, "No, don't take him to jail, don't
exactly.
take him to jail." You know,
Exactly, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah,
and
I've had those
and even
cases.
if, yeah, even if they do that, the DA will still go forward and present the testimony of the victim. Sometimes they're going to be a hostile witness, and sometimes they refuse to testify at all. And
Right. Yeah, we've
all
had
these
those
laws,
cases.
all these laws were enacted to protect the victims from not wanting to pursue the charges because they're afraid they're going to get beat up more if they went through with it. Well, they don't have a choice now.
Right, exactly, appreciate that, and, we understand the cycles of violence, and they say it
Hmm.
takes 7 times for incidents to happen, and there's a progression, so of course we understand that. But again,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, I've had cases as well where we've arrested both people and,
Right.
the prosecutor didn't care for it, but every case is different, so, as
Yeah.
you know, there's no standard protocol, but we do arrest the primary aggressor, thing when
Hmm.
things changed as far as statutes, and then we were forced to do that just for people's own protection, either side, whichever was the
Yeah.
aggressor. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so this is it's interesting how they're painting this portrait of again. trafficking, and federal law prohibits recruitment, harboring, transportation of, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of commercial sex acts, right, involving force, fraud, and coercion, right? So that seems to be the words they're tossing out there, or that's relevant to their charges. I do understand the elements of the crime and what's required, so they have
Yeah.
to show that force, fraud, coercion.
I'm wondering why they didn't call any of those particular workers to testify on, so okay, so tell us about these freak offs, and you were hired to, engage in various intimate acts with what you were told was Diddy's girlfriend, or just some of his friends there. So
Right.
I'm really surprised they didn't have this one particular male that has been mentioned
Okay.
um, several times. Why they didn't call him to the stand so that he could corroborate? Say, yeah, look, he paid me $1,000 a night, and this is what I was supposed to do. That's what I did. No,
Right.
nobody forced me to do anything. That's that's what I get paid to do. And
Exactly. Yeah, and there was another
right,
male that was mentioned. He wasn't even aware it was Diddy and Cassie initially, because they had masks, and so
yeah,
I guess he learned after several encounters. So again, is that force? I guess that remains to be seen. But I'm curious where the jury is, because they've thrown so much at them. They've
right,
traumatized them with these videos. I mean, I guess it's fetishes essentially, right? But not to be desensitized, but we've seen so much over the years that it becomes, we look at things from a professional perspective, or
mhm,
professional nature, because we've had to a little bit desensitize, or just look at it from a totally different view. But again, we're
yeah,
looking for what kind of crimes potentially, or what kind of relationships, where this thing originated, where we can also find the evidence. So it'll be interesting when defense starts.
yeah, and it's just so far all they've called were the women that were involved.
Okay.
And if you read in between the lines there, and I'm trying to be as sensitive as I can, if you
Exactly.
read
Yes.
between the lines, it's alleged that Diddy was a right-handed pitcher and a left-handed pitcher.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. For
So
sensitive nature, I do understand that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, and I mean, so is that, my thing is, there was mentions of apartments that were paid for, and I believe
hmm,
are still being paid for, by
yeah,
some of the witnesses that have recently testified. This Jane Doe allegedly said, yeah, he would hold that over my head, and but he's actually still paying for that same apartment or condo, whatever that is, right? So again, so sex trafficking by force, again, they've had psychologists and psychiatrists or whatever come in, forensic, people, and talk about the trauma, or the standardized trauma of what victims
right,
experience. So I do understand that they're trying to educate the jury and so forth.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but my thing, have they proven each component of that? So I just took the liberty to look at the difference between S trafficking versus S work or workers. And they're two distinct things. So they talk about S
hmm,
work as a voluntary exchange of services for money and or goods. While trafficking involves force, fraud, coercion. Then again, those
right.
three terms, right? Um, but as you mentioned, some of these, were they actually freely participating, or was there actual control and manipulation?
And that's what the question's going to be. I think that's what the jury's going to have to decide. But
Right.
when you've got testimony that um, these male workers were being paid to perform with
Okay.
Diddy's girlfriend so that he could videotape it.
Right.
Um, I mean, where do you get the criminality out of that, and where do you get the liability out of that? Did the male worker say, "No, I don't want to do this, and here's your money, I'm leaving," or did he say, "Yeah, that's what you paid me $1,000 for, so here's what I'll do," and
Right. Yeah,
there
and I
there
look at
were
the I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I look at the videotape, so I look at just their strategic positioning of each witness, like starting with Cassie. We know this kind of started with the lawsuit and the
Hmm.
settling of the lawsuit in one
Hmm.
day, which is kind of a catalyst for the maybe the search warrant. And I guess we could always speculate as far as was this part of the strategy to even engage that, um, open the I guess the floodgates for the liability and
Yeah.
the probable cause for their search warrant. They had to have some PC, as we know, probable cause, to get the search warrants to execute them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then again, what were they looking for?
right,
Corroboration that this was forced trafficking
right,
versus compensated trafficking, and
right.
so that I think Nevada is the only state that has legalized prostitution, brothels and
Okay,
stuff, and that is
right.
limited to people. Oh yeah, prostitution's legal in Las Vegas. No, it's not.
Okay,
It it's legal in some of the counties in Nevada where the population is under 100,000, and so that's why
okay,
you have there's a couple of brothels that are relatively close, about a half hour, 45-minute drive from the strip, and so people think, well, that's part of Vegas, and it's legal there, so it's legal in Vegas. Well, no, it's not, because that's a different county, and
okay.
the statutes allow for uh, legalized prostitution in counties that where they have a minimum population. So um,
Interesting.
it's you're not going after the workers there, um,
Right.
and you, every once in a while you'll come across a male that works at one of those at a brothel
Okay.
exclusively for servicing females, and I mean it's
Okay.
rare. It's really
Okay.
rare, but it's not unheard of. It does happen. Um,
Okay.
so it's such a fine line, especially when it's so prevalent in
Right.
every city, every major city, where they have big conventions, and men are going to be men all over the world, and in
Right.
some places they pay much higher price than in other places, and in other places they don't pay any financial transaction at all. It's
Right.
now you're dealing with a delicate subject, that's for sure.
It
So,
absolutely, and I mean, by no means are we, taking a side or, blaming the victims or, alleging they're not victims. Again, it's about what the government's gonna be able to prove, and,
mhm,
I just question, um, or I'm curious about, as you said, is it creating confusion for the jury? So I guess, can we actually
yeah,
look at Diddy as a I guess they say it's like trafficker or pimp or what have you.
uh-huh,
Um, but
uh-huh,
was there financial gain from this? Or if you're funding everything, I guess I'm saying, if you're paying for all the parties, all the food, or whatever, um, are you gaining? Is there a financial compensation or increase if you're putting the money out? So I guess it
yeah,
gets into that aspect of
yeah,
coercion.
and that gets into a lot of terminology and verbiage that you would use, because here in Nevada, in just about every state, um, in order to combat street level prostitution, they've enacted laws where it applies to the pimps. And if the
Right,
pimps
right,
are making money off of the prostitutes that they have under their control, then that's a separate offense. Out here,
right,
we call it living off the earnings of a prostitute, and you don't have to do anything but sit there and collect money when they get back from their date, and
right, right,
that right there is a crime in and of itself. So
right.
those incidents were brought up because the pimps would make all this money, and there was nothing that they could be charged for, because they weren't actively engaged in either providing the transportation for the prostitutes,
Okay.
or various other aspects of day-to-day living for these. Most of the time, these girls are forced into it, and
Right.
given a choice, they'd rather not do that, which brings in a whole nother socioeconomic aspect to it.
Yes.
And lately, well, it's in the last few years, there's been a trend to see these women who are in that particular profession, to see them as victims
Okay.
of different circumstances and crimes that cause them to become prostitutes and to
Right.
engage in that kind of lifestyle, which, if they were able to work in any other way, they would do that. But that's a whole nother story, man. That's a six beer
Exactly.
story when that is involved. And I think right now that there's a higher understanding between cops and the DA and social workers about, just exactly why are these girls um, doing this for a living, and they all have
Right.
different reasons, but at the end of the day, most of them are forced into that by some bad choices that they make,
Okay.
and they have a hard time getting away from it. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they're
Right.
criminals. So, many of them are. A lot of many drug addicts are. We hear the
Right.
term crack whore all the time, and
Right.
that's exactly what they are. But we also hear the term high class escort, which,
Right.
at the end
Right.
of the day, they're both being compensated for intimate acts, and
Right.
uh, they don't take into consideration why they have reached that part of that aspect of life where you have to do that to get by.
Right, absolutely. Well spoken. Thank you. Yeah, so I did just selected a few different slides to, compare and contrast between, as you mentioned, forced labor trafficking
Hmm.
versus S trafficking. And it talks about inhumane conditions. So just to compare and contrast with, some of the conditions maybe overseas or different countries where people are actually transported to and forced to go against their will.
Yeah,
Um, can't imagine the conditions, but these were high class hotels.
right,
Um, People were
right.
invited to, and so were those inhumane conditions? Were the workers paid or not for these freak off hotel nights, right? And could they have left at any time? Those kind of questions would come to mind as a juror, I would think.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I guess they've introduced the mental coercion aspect of, well, there was manipulation, or they're holding an
Yeah,
apartment or holding my job over my head.
right.
I'm going to fire you. But then there's also the allure of, celebrities, because now I know there's other high class, as you said, A list, B list, whatever celebrities names that have been mentioned. So if you're partying with a person like Sean Diddy Combs, you're seeing these other people, whether they were engaged in these acts or paid acts, or just literally having a party. Because as I said before, my understanding is they would have a regular party, and after a certain time, some celebrity said, "Well, I left after this time because
Yeah,
I was told," and I think even Diddy said, kids got to go home. We're gonna allegedly turn up, as he says. I guess we're gonna party harder, but maybe that's what he meant, or maybe that's when the drugs come out. Whatever that meant. So could people have left at any time? Some people did, maybe some
hmm.
didn't.
Hmm.
Um, so I
And
guess if
when drinking is involved, that inhibitions go out the window when the drinking starts, and
right,
a lot of people will engage in activities they wouldn't normally engage in, even though they're very salacious and they're very uh, hormonally driven
right,
to, hey, just go down that hallway, and on the second door on the left, you're going to find something that you're really going to like.
right,
Oh, okay.
exactly. Yeah, and then even the allure of, again, being in the presence of celebrities that are there, whether there was activity or actions present, but
Hmm.
again, we see
Hmm.
just entertainment just as an industry itself. I mean, just people that go to concerts, they're losing their minds at the concerts and
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
movies or movie premieres. So just to see
Yeah,
someone, a celebrity walking down the street or they enter a restaurant.
right.
Um, yeah, it's almost surreal, but to see them at an actual party, where we may attend and can't imagine. So I imagine I'm thinking, um, could they have left at any time? I guess is questions, but um, there's been quite a bit of discussions about prosecutors being accused of misconduct and
Oh
um,
yeah,
yeah, so we'll see. I guess they're in the process of the judge hearing that as well. But yeah, so that question, I found this slide says if someone is an S worker, they must be a human trafficking victim also. But of course, different sources, have different components of that. My question
you're
also
breaking
about,
up.
oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry, I think I bumped the microphone. So this question I pose about Cassie here, there were messages and texts presented during her testimony about, she would set up the party or I'm going to set it up. And I mean, how does that prove or show force or coercion if you're kind of like conspiring with me? So are
Right.
these co-conspirators and victims, or there's that gray area I think you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it right there. Is so she's in. Let's just use a hypothetical, and I'm not saying this is
Okay.
what happened with Cassie at all, but
Okay.
you're in a relationship. You're going to do whatever your partner wants to be done, so that you can prove, oh, I love him, and this is what he wanted to do, so I was okay with it.
Okay.
Versus, I told him, I said, look, I'm not crazy about this. I don't want to have another man in the bedroom with us and
Right.
stuff like that. So it's a matter of who was being either manipulated into doing this versus who was doing it just to go along to please their partner. I mean, we
Okay.
we all do things that hey, I don't really want to do that, but if it makes you happy, honey, I'll do it. It's not my thing, but if that's what you like,
Okay.
then that's what you like, and I'll do that for you.
Right. They say
But you have
happy
to
what?
you have to draw a line somewhere. There's got to be boundaries, and it didn't sound
Okay.
like they were very
I
particular
think you're
situation.
gotcha. I think you're frozen there. Can you okay, I think it just maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's all the heat that's freezing the
Yeah, you
Wi-Fi.
froze up for a second there.
Okay. All right. Think hopefully we'll make it through this successfully. Um but yeah, you're absolutely right. So they say happy wife, happy life, right? So
Yeah.
again, right. This is a whole different animal here we're talking about. So I guess they're happy boyfriend,
Oh, I
girlfriend. I don't
like
know.
that one. I
But
like that slide.
yeah, this is the spectrum of influence. So again, we try to go a little bit higher level with, our thought or at least offering different ways to look at it. So of course, this talks about the spectrum of influence, um, manipulation versus, collaboration versus coercion, right? So where does where does it change or where does potential actions and or that desire to please our partners, where does it blur the lines of um I guess
I think we're
agreement
having some
or
connection issues. Mm.
are we? Okay. I can see you. Are you there? Let me take you out and put you back in here.
Yeah, that one slide, I found that one particularly interesting, but uh, it had
Can can
you were breaking up while you were
okay.
explaining it, and
Well, let's
that
talk about it
that's
again. I'll put it
that's
right
pretty
back up.
good communication right there on what to look for and
Okay.
how a person can end up being manipulated and them not even know that they're being manipulated.
Right. Yeah, because I mean influence is it's all about just the power and the money. Again, it's about the maybe the maturity or lack thereof, or
Hmm.
just manipulation in terms of the mind games. I guess the money also can factor in. But when does it blur the lines to become like coercion or force?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if it's physical, that's one thing. But if it can it be mental? Also, I imagine it can.
Oh, I would imagine it's going to be very emotionally draining and mental abuse, emotional abuse to get them to go along with what you want done
Okay,
versus you take the love and affection aspect out of it. And would you do that for anybody that you were involved in, or would
right. I think we have a connection issue again here. Let's see if we can get you back in here. Let's try again. Bill, are you there?
okay?
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
here.
Yeah, it's Murphy's Law, like it's a Monday or something. So, yeah, I also found another slide you may find interesting. We'll get through this. So, again, this slide talks about unveiling coercive tactics, right? So they mention things like gaslighting, emotional
Hmm.
manipulation, power imbalance. So clearly, these are dynamics that were present, right? With the money, the power, I guess, respect, or if he had that, and then
Every
financial
one of those.
dependence.
Yeah,
Yeah, every one of these comply. Um, and again, we're not
yeah.
taking sides, just kind of presenting the facts and some of the dynamics of what applies to coercion, right? So again, I found a different slide. So Jane Doe, when we talk about forced or coercion, Jane Doe mentioned 90% of the time together revolved around these freak offs or what she now refers to as hotel nights, which were drug fueled orgies where she was allegedly coerced and blackmailed into having marathon sessions of um, having physical activity. So again, can
It, it's going to boil down to the jury and what their thoughts are on
right,
these different aspects of a life of that nature.
right,
There's a lot of that going on every weekend, um, just about everywhere. People
right,
having intimate sessions with a bunch of people involved, or just
right.
the old wife swapping thing and all that. But
Yeah,
um,
they talk about
it's gonna
parties, and
boil
there's
down to yeah, yeah, yeah,
you heard of people. Some people are swingers as they're labeled. So
yeah,
again, if you change the terminology, does it change
right.
the act or does it mean something different with the labeling? That's I guess kind of what we're talking about with this S
Well, and
workers.
yeah, exactly, because there's a fair number of people who engage in that kind of activity willingly and joyfully. That's their
Right.
thing. That's what they like to do.
Right,
Share
exactly.
and share alike.
Right.
And so, where's the criminality there?
Right. So yeah, another thing that you mentioned, a good point you talked
Be
about
interesting to
earlier.
see you.
I'm sorry. I think you say that one more time. Can you hear me?
Um, yeah, I got you.
Okay, yeah. I think when I switch the screen, sometimes it may go in and out. But yeah, what you mentioned earlier about whether it's drinking or drug use, can a person, if you're mutually using, alcohol and drugs, is that coercion? So I found this slide talks about generally mutual drug use where both
Well, I
individuals.
think what that's
Let's see if you're breaking up again. Yeah, let's bring it back here. Maybe this. Yeah, let's see. We lost him for a minute. So again, I'm
embarrassing.
presenting
Oh
this.
no, I
Can
wouldn't
you
do
hear me?
that. I'd have to be really drunk to do something stupid like that.
Right. And
Which
see, yeah.
that's true. Well, people get drunk and they do things they would never do if they weren't drunk.
Right. Exactly. Do you hear me okay there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I guess my question is, if we're mutually using, um, am I in my right frame of mind to, as you said, agree or consent, and or am my or is the other party in the right frame of mind to force you or stop you or assist you should you say, hey, this is too much, right? As you said, I don't want
Right.
to do that.
Yeah.
So again, coercion says one person forces or manipulates another into using drugs. This could be just for drug use specifically, but I think it still applies to, the S acts and the
Right.
fetishes and everything else. So force, they talk about force, fraud, or coercion. I mean, I think that applies. But if we're both under the influence, it's kind of like, for example, I'll say this analogy where we arrest like someone for DUI or operating in a vehicle under the influence, whatever that may be. Do we readily test them, or do we have a certain time frame in which to test them, or not? Or do we like someone that has been assaulted, by the R word? Um, if they've been roofied or been given some substance,
Hmm.
do they even test that person until that substance has been, flushed from their system? So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's as you said, a lot of very sensitive areas and gray areas to consider. Um, but the prosecutor, I guess the defense has asked for mistrial, so they're citing that prosecutorial misconduct has been initiated where they've had this witness, Brianna, testify saying she was dangled over a balcony. And they're
Oh.
saying, yeah, even though um, defense is saying prosecutors know that allegation is false, but they still were allowed to have her testify. And I guess a judge took that under advisement last week. So, um, yeah, clearly they're just trying to present everything, as much as they can, as many testimonies as they can, and then does misconduct, if that is in fact a thing, does that
Hmm.
factor in, or I mean, where does that leave the jury? Because they can say, strike this from the record, or just,
Yeah.
but you can't unhear some things.
Right. Yeah. Once it's
Right.
said
So
and the jury reacts to it, the judge says the jury will disregard that last comment. Oh
right.
yeah, how? How are you going to do that? It's already in
Exactly.
your head.
Right. So yeah, is it prejudicial, as they call it? Again, none of this is legal advice. We're just having a conversation. But yeah, but I have to put that disclaimer in there. But yeah, so is it prejudicial to the case? As you said, you can't unhear some things, especially when they're um graphic, and I mean
Hmm.
they're obviously can be traumatizing. I can imagine some of these videos they're having to watch, and I mean various jurors have, various backgrounds, some religious or some not. Some people may engage in those similar activities because there's private lives and there's the public lives of
Hmm.
everyone. But
Yeah.
um yeah, so we'll see what happens there. You talked about the hotel, so another question I had is, their duty to report the crime. We know there was a settlement in terms of them failing to report, but is there a duty for hotels and or citizens, like civilians, to report what they've seen? We've seen the video over and over again. But again, are the hotels also responsible if someone's assaulted? So I'd like my viewers, I know this is pre-recorded, but put yes or no in the comments. Do you think the hotel should be responsible for someone being assaulted on their property or failing to report someone being assaulted? As we said with the domestic violence,
Yeah.
how do you not call that in to at least say, hey, she needs assistance, or this
Right.
person? Um,
Right.
yeah, so we know there's a settlement that happened. I think there's somewhere reported in the realm of 10 million by that particular hotel. But I pose this question of the timing of everything. I believe there was a separate lawsuit that Diddy had against the spirits company. I'm not sure if you were aware of that.
No.
Whereas prior to the settlement and lawsuit with Cassie, prior to the charges and the um, search and seizure and the um, indictment, 70% of Diddy's money has been accumulated by spirits. So, he had Ciroc and different vodkas and tequilas and so forth, where I guess he found that at some point in time, he was initially hired as an ambassador to come on board to improve the branding of their vodka and their tequila, and he raised the um, monetary assets from and sales from 40,000 bottles to like 2 million. So they gave him his own brand, his own vodka and spirits. Long story
Diddy was?
short, I'm sorry, yes, he was hired as an ambassador for this particular
Oh, okay.
company. This is kind of separate, but it may factor in if everyone's
Yeah.
not aware of it. But um, so yeah, he found that he actually made a trip to the company and found his plants and his company was not being taken care of per contract. So he
Oh,
sued and won $1 billion lawsuit. And
really?
his understanding was, if you're charged criminally, that person doesn't have to pay you for that lawsuit that you've won. So very interesting dynamic and the
Yeah,
timing.
I
So
hadn't
2
heard
months
that.
late, yeah, he won the lawsuit, and 2 months later, there comes the Cassie suit. Here comes the charges 2 months after, the indictment, and here we go. So, that doesn't excuse any of his actions. Again,
No.
by no means do we agree or condone anything, but yeah, does that factor in? So,
So
we know
what?
the
I wonder if the jury is aware of that.
now
Is
that
that?
yeah, that'll be interesting if it's even mentioned or if they're allowed to mention that. Now
Yeah,
that can be prejudicial towards
yeah,
the case itself because it does factor in terms of, I guess we're in the court of public opinion essentially, with the speculation and discussions, but it does factor in, I think, with, um, I mean, is it relevant, or is it not relevant in terms of what they're posing as far as the trafficking charges and racketeering? Um, so yeah, this is, and we know other witnesses. I want to ask, do other just common witnesses have a duty to report? Like if you know a crime, like let's say hypothetically the employees, the assistants, current and or ex, if they are aware of crimes that took place, does that excuse them from being again a co-defendant, co-conspirator? Um, and are they required to report a crime as they knew it? So I don't know. As you mentioned, racketeering and RICO is an
yeah.
organization or an enterprise essentially. But yeah, I want to pose that
I
question.
don't know. I think different jurisdictions have different
In different laws, yeah.
mechanisms. Yeah, and we had a case here that that I had investigated. A little 7-year-old girl was sexually assaulted and murdered in a
Oh
bathroom by an
boy.
18-year-old kid. The 18-year-old kid's friend saw what happened, and he didn't tell anybody.
Okay.
So one aspect of the outcome of that case, and the 18-year-old is spending the rest of his life in prison for what he did to this little 7-year-old girl. But they
Okay.
also enacted a law that if you see crimes of violence, essays,
Right.
robberies, assaults, murders, that
Right.
you do have a duty to report it. Because this guy knew what was happening, saw his friend committing an essay against this little girl, and then
Okay.
when come out of the bathroom, he said, "What happened to her?" He goes, "Oh, I killed her," and
Wow.
didn't say anything to anybody.
Okay.
And and now here in Nevada, that now that there is that requirement, but I
Okay.
don't think every state has that same reporting duty.
Right. Absolutely. And I did a little bit of digging there. So with that case, just again, not to dial back to the entire case, how much further did you learn that? That was like, did you learn that years later, or did the young man come forward finally to say, "This is what I know," or what I
Oh
witnessed,
no,
or
this was right in the middle of the investigation. In fact, the suspect during his confession, when I was talking to him, I asked him if anybody else was part of this, and he said, "Well, my friend saw me doing it, and he didn't say anything."
wow,
And I said, "When you were actually committing an act of violence against this little 7-year-old girl, your friend saw that." He goes, "Yeah, he
wow,
looked over the bathroom stall and saw me doing it. He didn't say anything to anybody." And
wow.
there was a uproar, man, in the community that we couldn't charge him because at the time that there was no duty to report at at that particular time that there is now, based on that one specific incident. Um,
Okay.
so
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I found as you mentioned, it varies per jurisdiction. So, I
mhm,
found this again, there's no legal duty for a civilian to report every crime they witness, but again, contingent upon where you live or reside. Like in Ohio here, it says as in most states, there's no general duty to report, but you could face charges like conspiracy or complicity if you know of a crime or a crime's going to happen and you don't. But that's Ohio. Whereas I found in Las Vegas, as you mentioned, I'm going to make this larger here. Witnesses have a duty to report certain events,
yeah,
primarily crimes, but again, failure to report could be a range of charges, as we all know. And then in New York, citizens have a duty to cooperate. So that poses an interesting question because a lot of this took place in New York, or I guess where he's charged with, particularly the RICO or racketeering. Um, do his employees have a duty to report? And I know we know about the NDAs, but those
mhm,
don't excuse you from reporting a crime.
right, right.
Again, so do you think that's clearly a strategy of the government to say, we'll provide immunity to you if you tell us what you saw or what you heard? Um, does
Yeah,
that
I
excuse
mean,
them from participation?
I personally, I think that should be mandated in every state, a duty to
Okay.
report,
Yeah.
within reason, specific violent crimes. Yeah, not, hey, I saw my neighbor steal a six pack of beer from the 7-Eleven.
Right.
Uh,
And they didn't share it with me, right?
right? Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's usually,
That
yeah. That's usually
it's
what happens, right? They don't someone didn't get paid or didn't get paid enough, or you didn't give me my cut of what you promised me, and you
mhm,
know, and then I mean, is there a greed factor also with this entire case? I guess there's obviously a monetary gain for a
yeah,
lot of the survivors or victims, but is there a
right.
greed factor or opportunist factor that comes in?
Yeah, and that'll all come into play. Uh, People's reluctance to get involved.
Right.
Um, you know, some people have higher morals than others, and it's a shame that we have to have laws like that enacted. But let's face it, we can't depend on people to do the right thing anymore. Um,
Exactly. That's true.
they're too busy filming it on their damn cell phone, and instead of trying to stop an assault or call the police, and
Right.
they want to be the first ones to get on the internet and say, "Oh, look what I saw today. Look at this."
Right. Oh, I mean, there's so many cases we could talk about in that context, right? With,
Yeah,
watching somebody sit on somebody's neck to, someone just assaulting. It's like, put the camera down and help me, right?
right,
Or,
right.
yell something. I mean,
Yeah,
and I guess people are kind of starting to take those more aggressive approaches to stopping certain actions, not just to put it on law enforcement, but just
right,
as a analogy or whatever, just as a quick thought. Again, as you said, everyone's trying to go viral and so forth. But yeah, dialing back to this case, one other thing, a term I've not heard yet, is this essentially was there some kind of gaslighting component or grooming component in terms of Sean Diddy Combs grooming these adult women? I don't think we have a factor of the child factor in this or underage. I'm not sure. I guess we'll see what all is presented. But do you think there's some kind of grooming of these victims for this activity or
I don't know.
gaslighting?
That's a good question. I think a lot depends on the person themselves.
Okay.
If you're a moral person and you innately want to do what's right or stop someone from causing great bodily harm to someone else,
Right.
there's I think a person's individual standing within not just the community but themselves.
Right, right,
Let's say you witness something, you don't report it, and the next morning you come and find out that what you witnessed ended up being a murder, and you could have stopped it. You know,
right,
how do you live with yourself over that? Some people say, "Hey, I didn't know. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get hurt. You know, this guy will beat me up or something like that."
right, right. Yeah, and it's when you don't say anything, of course it for some people it never applies until it happens to them.
Right.
And but again, it's someone's got to stand in the gap and someone's got to do right. It's about what we do when no one's looking that makes a
Exactly.
difference, right? Do we
Yeah.
throw that paper down or do we carry it 5 feet or 10 feet to the trash can, right?
Right.
So,
Hmm.
and those little those deposits into just humanity, and it pays dividends later, right? So
Yeah.
we don't have rodents and everything else, but that's
Right.
kind of wild off the subject, but yeah, I think it does factor into just humanity and us caring for one another. But in this context, I guess we'll see what happens in terms of the case, and whether grooming is even mentioned at all. um,
Right. Yeah.
I'm curious about what kind of Diddy talks about having receipts of you know, other evidence or other videos of people involved, or um, I guess we'll see what kind of defense they present in
Oh,
its
yeah.
entirety.
I'm sure he's got a ton of stuff on his phone or on his computer of exactly what we're talking about,
Right,
unless he's purged it since all this has happened. Um,
right,
but
right.
yeah, I'm sure this was just the tip of the iceberg for this particular kind of behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we could all, we've all heard the stories of rock bands, in
Oh
the
yeah.
'80s and the wild parties, and that all sounds glamorous when you got the guitar raging, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have a room full of 20 men or women or everybody together,
Yeah.
right? Whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not, again, it sounds wild, but I'm sure, people have stories about,
Oh yeah.
even in the '60s, '70s, right? As you said, hippies and things. So I'm sure wild stock was pretty interesting. But not to compare this to that, but I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Were you present
Yeah.
for any of that, or just
No, Woodstock was just before I started realizing that the world is a crazy place, and
right,
yeah,
right?
that was, I did a lot of undercover work in the '80s, man, and we talk about the
Oh yeah.
decadent '80s. Sex, drugs, rock and roll.
Okay.
That was more than just a catchphrase. That was how a lot of people lived their lives, man.
Right.
It was crazy.
Would you say it was kinda normalized, I guess, in at that time, and
Oh
we have
yeah,
always
we'd go to a going back to the sweater days, man. We'd go to a
Oh, yeah.
disco and people were carrying on, doing lines of coke,
Okay.
on one of the tables there, and then there's some uh, really misbehaving females in the booth next to you, and
Okay.
it was decadent, man. The '80s were just decadent, but they were a
Okay.
lot of fun.
Okay, yeah. Right, exactly, yeah, I was born, in the 1970s, so I was still a baby. Um, Maybe I don't miss skipping all that, so I was probably in the house looking out the window, but I had older brothers and sisters, so yeah, and, they never kinda talked about it, they were just kinda out there, but
Mhm, mhm.
good times, right? I mean, a lot of different
Oh, yeah,
things that
yeah.
factor into the transitions and things. So yeah, we'll see if all these things I guess we mentioned, like with this slide, it's they're trying to paint that picture of it applies or manipulation, and I guess in that context, if there was grooming or I guess what they want to call adult grooming,
Mhm.
we'll see how it factors in. Um,
Yeah, the closing arguments are gonna be really interesting.
Absolutely, because yeah, I think even just the one charge of transportation for prosecution.
Yeah,
By the way, that's based on what's called the Mann Act of
right.
1910. They
Yeah,
went way back. So, but
yeah.
yeah, that charge I believe carries about 10 years alone. So, whether they prove force, fraud, coercion, this is kind of a generalized statement of any transportation of individuals, men and women,
Hmm.
in interstate or foreign commerce for the purpose of, as you said, prostitution, oldest profession, any sexual activity, other immoral purposes, right? So that's pretty broad, but I mean, does that kind
Yeah,
of cover?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a catch-all for it, and
Right.
I think just about every law created against prostitution has got its roots in the Mann Act because
Okay.
they had to have some kind of way to at least slow it down. Back in the
Okay.
1900s, man, there was brothels all over the country, and
Okay.
every major city, had brothels,
Okay.
and that was just a way of life. That's just back
Right.
then before morality became a big deal, and
Right.
yeah, that was
That's
that
something.
was pretty prevalent.
Right. Do you think there's a reason why Vegas has is that the only state that has legalized um prostitution? Well, I guess it prostitution, whatever
Brothels
you
and legalized
brothels, yeah.
prostitution. I think one other state may have it. I'm not sure, and I don't want to say a state specifically because if I'm wrong,
Gotcha.
they're going to jump all over me. But
Right.
I know that there was at least one other state at one time. I don't know if it's been taken
Okay.
off the books, and Nevada is still the only state.
Okay.
But it's not like every town has their own little red light
Ooh, excuse
district.
me.
I don't think there's 10 brothels in the whole state.
Sorry about that. I got an alarm here. All right. I think that's sorry about that. That's supposed to be on vibrate.
That's okay. That's all right.
All right. Um, yeah, so I guess we can think back to the crime families and how it was set up and the
Yeah.
reason why that, but I guess that's also speculating or just common knowledge. But yeah, so
Mhm,
this is you know what, we're gonna wrap this up soon. So again, opening statements, the defense talks about, this case, it's about love, jealousy, infidelity, and money. It's about voluntary adult choices made by capable adults and consensual relationships. So they're
mhm,
saying the government can say over and over again, this is about his private sex. It's not about his private sex life, but they're showing all of that now on film and everything. So, but they also state there's not one witness that'll get into the courtroom and say this was they were a part of racketeering. So again, that might be some of the confusion that's been presented.
mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and of course, are they, has defense started? I believe they're wrapping up, prosecution's wrapping up, and defense is going to get into their portion of the case. I know there's cross and everything, but it'll be interesting when the state wraps up.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the defense has got all kinds of stuff that they're gonna bring in to,
Oh yeah,
create that reasonable doubt or, at least the preponderance of evidence
right,
limit. So, we'll wait and see.
right. It's
Oh,
pretty wild. Yeah, you try not to follow this, but how can you not? See the
it's
headlines and
headline news every night, man.
right.
Every night.
Right, and then I guess who's gonna be added to the case or who's gonna be introduced as far as other celebrities. So,
Yeah,
I think I heard some top names earlier, Brad Pitt and so forth. And but
right.
does that mean they're a part of it, or were they just at the party? So,
They just happened to be at the party, yeah.
right.
And I'll bet you there's a lot of people sweating saying, "Man,
Oh
yeah, I
yeah.
went to a couple of his parties, but I didn't stick around for all that crazy stuff. I left, I just
Right.
made an appearance
Exactly.
because it was a cool thing to do."
Right.
So,
Yeah, and of course, with that raid and seizures, all the videos have been
yeah.
confiscated. So again, what do they release? I guess they were trying to get him to take a plea deal. But yeah, if you're in his position, do you take a plea deal and you're like, I wasn't alone, or what do you do in that context, right? So
Well,
we'll see.
yeah. I think that depends on how much the prosecution knows, how much they can prove, and you're
Right,
never gonna know until it hits you in the face. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Interesting times coming forward. I think there's a
Yeah.
whirlwind of
Yeah.
evidence, and we're just holding on to the edge of our seats. I think it's just the
Yeah.
Just the
I don't
beginning of
think
the storm.
I don't think I'll go to any more of his parties.
Oh, gotcha. I gotcha. Right. Or at least leave by 11 if you do, right? So,
Yeah.
and I guess I'm going to ask you this question. We'll wrap up. The pardon, there was a mention of maybe they asked Trump would he give him a pardon, and he said he may consider it. I think he used to like me. Um,
I don't I,
ah,
I
yeah,
don't even know about that, man. That's
yeah, yeah,
politics. I loathe politics. I just cannot.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's not my thing.
Yeah, I've always stood clear of that too. Yeah, not to introduce that, but yeah, I stand clear of it at work, and I'm like, hey, there's a lot going on, and we'll see what
Right.
happens. But
Right.
Phil, I want to thank you again for attending, and any last words or thoughts on this trial?
Now let's see what happens, man. It's going to get much
Right,
more interesting than it's been so far. It has to, because at this point the
right.
jury's going to still scratching their head, going, what are we doing here? You know,
Exactly. Right.
some of them are probably going to say, well, I've been to a party like that and nobody got in trouble.
Right. Exactly. Right.
We'll
And
see.
yeah, absolutely. So again, thank you, and hold a second, and I'll be with you. So yeah, this is again, we talked about Diddy and S workers or trafficking. A couple interesting points. I want to thank Phil for again attending, and stay tuned. Please, by all means, like and subscribe. Brought to you by the Dr. Detective, a PhD true crime podcast in collaboration with the Crime Talk channel in STS Nation. Again, thank you, Phil, and we'll see
My
you all
pleasure.
soon.